My fiancée slammed our apartment door so hard the pictures rattled on the wall, grabbing her car keys with a fury I'd never seen from her before. "I'm going to Marcus's place," she said. "Maybe he'll remind me what it feels like to be with someone who actually respects me." She had absolutely no idea what was waiting for her when she got there. My name is Corwin Ashby. I'm 32, living in Portland, Oregon, engaged to Renata for 18 months. That night, we'd argued about wedding budget decisions, an argument that escalated far beyond its original topic until Renata threw out her ex-boyfriend's name as a weapon, storming out before I could even fully process what was happening. I sat alone in our apartment for nearly 20 minutes replaying the argument, trying to understand how a disagreement about catering costs had escalated into Renata driving toward her ex-boyfriend's apartment, specifically to hurt me. Then I remembered something that made my stomach drop. 3 days earlier, Marcus had called me directly, a call I hadn't yet mentioned to Renata, requesting an urgent conversation about something he described only as time-sensitive and serious. Everyone watching this video, if you're already sensing where this story is heading, stay with me, because what actually happened at Marcus's apartment that night is nothing like what either Renata or I expected walking into it, and I promise the reveal is worth every second of anticipation building right now. I called Marcus immediately, my hands shaking slightly as I dialed. He answered on the second ring. "Marcus, Renata is on her way to your place right now," I said. "She's angry. She's using you as a weapon in an argument we just had, and I need to know what that urgent conversation you mentioned 3 days ago is actually about before she arrives." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Corwin, I think you need to come here too. What I need to tell both of you can't really wait any longer, and given what you're describing, maybe it's better if we're all in the same room when this happens." I drove to Marcus's apartment complex, arriving just 2 minutes after Renata, based on her car still visibly cooling in a nearby parking space. I found the apartment door slightly ajar, voices audible from inside. "Renata, please sit down," Marcus was saying as I entered. "This isn't what you're imagining." Renata turned toward me as I walked in, her earlier fury replaced by visible confusion. "Corwin, why are you here?" "Because Marcus called me 3 days ago," I said, "about something urgent he wouldn't fully explain over the phone. I think whatever's happening right now involves both of us, not just you seeking a revenge for our argument." Marcus gestured for both of us to sit, his expression carrying weight that suggested whatever he needed to share was significantly more serious than typical ex-boyfriend drama. "6 weeks ago," Marcus began, "I was diagnosed with a rare genetic condition, familial amyloid polyneuropathy. It's degenerative, currently untreatable in its advanced stages, though there's an experimental treatment showing promise if caught early enough." The room fell completely silent, Renata's earlier anger visibly transforming into shock. "Why does this involve us?" I asked carefully. "Because it's genetic," Marcus said, looking directly at Renata now. "And because you're my biological half-sister, Renata, something neither of us knew until my diagnostic testing revealed genetic markers that led to some uncomfortable questions about our actual family history." Renata's face went completely white. "That's not possible. We dated for 2 years, Marcus. We were together." "I know," Marcus said, visible distress evident in his voice. "Which is exactly why I've spent 3 weeks trying to figure out how to tell you this without completely destroying whatever relationship we've maintained as friends since our breakup. We share a biological father, Renata. Apparently, my mother had an affair decades ago, something I only discovered through genetic testing prompted by my diagnosis." I sat there, processing information that recontextualized not just tonight's confrontation, but years of complicated history between Renata and Marcus that had apparently never been what either of them believed it to be. "Who's our father?" Renata asked, voice barely above a whisper. Marcus took a shaky breath. "Warren Castellan. Your stepfather, actually, not your biological father as you've always believed. He had an affair with my mother 31 years ago, right around the time you would have been conceived." Renata's hands were shaking now, memories and assumptions from her entire life apparently crumbling in real time. "My mother always said my biological father left before I was born, that Warren adopted me as his own when they married." "According to genetic testing," Marcus said, "your biological father is actually the same man as mine. Warren Castellan had relationships with both our mothers around the same general time frame, apparently unknown to either woman until now." I want to pause here because I know you're processing this alongside Renata and me in real time, and I think this is exactly the moment worth asking yourselves. If you discovered this kind of family secret through your partner's ex, how would you even begin processing it? While you consider that, please hit subscribe if this story has you as invested as we were that night, because what happens next involves an even more complicated conversation with Renata's mother that neither of us saw coming. "I need to call my mother," Renata said, still visibly stunned. Right now, Renata's mother, Clarissa, arrived at Marcus's apartment 40 minutes later, having driven immediately upon hearing enough of the situation over the phone to understand its urgency. "How long have you known?" Renata asked her mother the moment she walked through the door, voice raw with emotion. Clarissa's face crumpled instantly. "I've always known, Renata. I never told you because Warren adopted you as his own daughter before you were even old enough to remember any different arrangement. I convinced myself the biological details didn't matter, that Warren's love as your father throughout your entire childhood was what actually defined your relationship, not genetic technicalities." "But you knew about Marcus's mother," Renata said. "You knew Warren had an affair around the same time I was conceived." "I suspected," Clarissa admitted, tears falling freely now. "Warren eventually confessed to a brief affair during a difficult period in our marriage right before you were born. I never knew for certain there might be a child from that affair until this exact moment." The four of us sat together for nearly 2 hours that night, untangling decades of hidden family history that connected Renata and Marcus in ways neither of them could have imagined during their 2 years of dating years earlier. "We dated for 2 years, Renata said at one point, processing the deeply uncomfortable reality of her romantic history with someone who was, biologically, her half-brother. "I need time to process what that actually means, retroactively, about our entire relationship." "I understand completely," Marcus said, "though I want you to know clearly, this diagnosis and the genetic revelation that followed weren't things I could have anticipated or prevented. We had no way of knowing this connection existed when we were together. Over the following weeks, Renata processed this revelation through extensive therapy, working through complicated feelings about her childhood identity, her relationship with her mother and stepfather, and the deeply uncomfortable, retroactive understanding of her previous relationship with Marcus. Warren, Renata's stepfather, who she'd always considered her biological father until that night, eventually had his own difficult conversation with Renata, confirming the affair, expressing genuine remorse for decades of concealment, though maintaining that his love and commitment to raising her as his daughter had never been diminished by biological technicalities. "I should have told you the truth when you became an adult," Warren admitted during an emotional conversation Renata later shared with me. "I convinced myself protecting you from complicated truth was more important than honoring your right to understand your own genetic history." Marcus, meanwhile, began aggressive treatment for his diagnosed condition, the experimental therapy showing promising early results, given how quickly the genetic connection had been identified and addressed medically. "I think there's something almost meaningful about how this all unfolded," Marcus told me during a private conversation several weeks later. "If Renata and I hadn't dated years ago, if that relationship hadn't created enough continued connection for me to reach out when I got diagnosed, we might never have discovered this genetic connection early enough to actually treat it effectively. Renata and I postponed our wedding by 3 months, both of us recognizing she needed significant time to process an identity-shifting revelation before we could genuinely focus on building our own future together with appropriate emotional bandwidth." During that postponement, Renata worked extensively with both individual and family therapists, processing not just the genetic revelation itself, but deeper questions about identity, family loyalty, and how foundational assumptions about her own history had shaped decisions throughout her entire life. "I think I understand now why our relationship with Marcus always felt slightly different than typical romantic relationships," she told me during one particularly reflective conversation. "There was always some subconscious familiarity, some connection that felt more like family than romance, even though neither of us understood why at the time." Marcus and Renata developed an entirely new relationship dynamic following this revelation, transitioning carefully from complicated ex-partners into acknowledged half-siblings, navigating that unusual transition with support from therapists specializing in complex family reunification situations. I have a sister now, Renata told me one evening, several months after that initial devastating revelation, her voice carrying something between continued processing and genuine, unexpected gratitude. Not the family member I expected to discover, but someone who's actually shown me consistent care and honesty throughout this entire complicated situation. We eventually rescheduled our wedding 6 months after that pivotal night at Marcus's apartment, incorporating this complicated family history into our lives with considerably more understanding and integration than the initial shock had suggested might be possible. Marcus attended our wedding not as an awkward ex-boyfriend, but as Renata's newly acknowledged half-brother, his experimental treatment continuing to show promising results that suggested significantly better long-term prognosis than his initial diagnosis had originally indicated. Warren and Clarissa worked through their own complicated marital reconciliation regarding decades of concealed truth, ultimately choosing to remain married while committing to considerably more honest communication. Moving forward, understanding that protecting Renata from difficult truth had ultimately caused more complicated pain than earlier honesty might have prevented. I think often about that night, about Renata storming out with anger and hurt, fully intending to seek some form of emotional revenge by visiting her ex-boyfriend, having absolutely no idea that the actual revelation waiting for her would completely reshape her understanding of her own identity and family history. If you've ever discovered that assumptions you've carried your entire life about your own family or identity were fundamentally incomplete or incorrect, I hope this story reminds you of something important. Sometimes, the most devastating revelations ultimately create space for entirely new, meaningful relationships and understanding that couldn't have existed within previous incomplete assumptions. The path toward genuine identity and family understanding sometimes requires navigating exactly the kind of shocking, disorienting truth that initially feels overwhelming before ultimately proving clarifying and even unexpectedly enriching. Real family isn't always defined by the assumptions we grow up believing. Sometimes it's defined by the genuine care, honesty, and support people choose to offer once complicated truths finally surface, transforming what initially feels like devastating revelation into unexpected, meaningful connection.